Field reports from the strange. This is Obscura Bureau.
This pattern of financial collapse after sudden wealth is documented in economic studies. The sudden influx of capital often overwhelms financial management systems that were not prepared for such scale. Unlike gradual wealth building, lottery winnings provide no time to develop the necessary financial literacy and discipline. This creates vulnerability to poor investments, predatory schemes, and unsustainable spending patterns. The psychological impact of sudden wealth can impair judgment and risk assessment capabilities. Many winners experience social isolation and relationship strain that further complicates financial decisions. The absence of gradual wealth accumulation means missing crucial learning experiences about money management. This creates a perfect storm where massive resources meet minimal financial infrastructure and experience. This case exemplifies a documented psychological pattern known as sudden wealth syndrome, where recipients struggle to adapt to their new financial reality. The systematic spending observed here mirrors behavior seen in other lottery winners who rapidly deplete their fortunes through impulsive purchases and poor investments. Unlike gradual wealth accumulation, sudden windfalls often bypass the normal financial learning curve, leaving recipients vulnerable to exploitation and bad decisions. The apparent goal of returning to zero suggests a psychological discomfort with wealth that exceeds the individual's self-concept or life experience. Financial advisors note that without proper planning, even substantial lottery winnings can be depleted within years through lifestyle inflation and lack of budgeting. This pattern of systematic spending to reach zero represents an extreme manifestation of wealth rejection, documented in psychological literature on sudden fortune. The late 1990s context is significant, as this period saw both economic expansion and increasing public awareness of lottery winners' frequent financial struggles. $50 million after taxes represents life-changing wealth, yet without financial literacy, it becomes a burden rather than a blessing for some recipients. Sudden wealth syndrome is a recognized psychological phenomenon documented by financial experts. It describes the intense psychological pressure that follows an abrupt financial windfall. This pressure stems from the removal of normal financial constraints that guide most life decisions. Without these constraints, individuals can lose their previous sense of purpose and direction. The syndrome often triggers identity crises, as one's self-worth becomes entangled with new wealth. Common patterns include impulsive spending, social isolation, and strained personal relationships. This psychological state can create a vulnerability to poor financial and personal choices. The transition from ordinary life to extreme wealth requires significant psychological adaptation, which many find difficult. The winner's spending began with real estate, acquiring multiple luxury properties. This included a multi-million-dollar mansion, requiring a full-time staff for maintenance. Such rapid property acquisition is a common pattern among sudden wealth recipients. The properties weren't just homes, but status symbols requiring significant ongoing costs. Maintenance for such estates often includes landscaping, security, utilities, and specialized staff. This initial spending phase set a pattern of public, extravagant consumption. Real estate purchases are often the most visible first step in sudden wealth scenarios. The public nature of these purchases attracted attention and established expectations. The property taxes and maintenance costs alone were crippling, draining resources that could have been preserved. This financial burden is a common pattern in wealth collapse, where fixed overhead consumes liquid assets. Second, the spending extended to a fleet of high-end vehicles, not just one or two sports cars, but numerous luxury and exotic models. This wasn't about transportation. It was about acquisition and display, a status-driven consumption pattern. Such collections represent depreciating assets that require ongoing insurance, storage, and upkeep expenses. This behavior mirrors documented cases where visible wealth display accelerates financial decline through compounded costs. The spending wasn't just extravagant. It was performative. It funded lavish, celebrity-style events for friends and even strangers, creating a spectacle of generosity. This behavior is consistent with patterns observed in other cases of sudden wealth, where public displays become a form of validation. He was known to give away expensive jewelry and cars on a whim, treating high-value items as casual gifts. Such impulsive gifting often serves to reinforce social status and create dependency among recipients. He would often pick up enormous tabs at nightclubs and restaurants, sometimes for entire venues. This created a cycle where his identity became tied to his capacity to spend, rather than any sustainable wealth generation. The parties and gifts weren't merely entertainment. They were mechanisms of social engineering. In documented cases, this pattern frequently precedes financial collapse, as resources are depleted on non-essential displays. This approach to wealth is a classic pattern in financial psychology, where windfalls are perceived differently than earned income. Treating money as an endless resource rather than managed capital often leads to rapid depletion, a phenomenon documented in behavioral economics. This segment explores the psychological limits and misconceptions surrounding sudden wealth acquisition. While financial illiteracy contributes to wealth loss, research indicates deeper psychological factors are at play. Interviews with financial psychologists reveal that sudden wealth often triggers identity crises and relationship pressures. The misconception of simple foolishness overlooks documented patterns of cognitive dissonance in wealth management. Behavioral studies show that windfall recipients frequently underestimate the psychological adjustment required for wealth preservation. This complex psychology involves both individual decision-making and social dynamics that accelerate financial decline. The winner faced immense pressure from friends, family, and strangers who viewed him as a limitless source of funds. This phenomenon is common among lottery winners, where sudden wealth creates unrealistic expectations from social circles. He made a statement suggesting he wanted to prove he could lose it all and still be happy. This implies the spending was, in part, a deliberate experiment or reaction to the stress of his new identity. Psychological research shows that sudden wealth can trigger identity crises, leading to self-destructive behaviors as coping mechanisms. What remains unknown are the precise internal motivations for every decision he made during this period. This case illustrates how external pressures and internal psychological responses can combine to create financial downfall. Similar patterns have been observed in other cases of sudden wealth, where the psychological burden proves overwhelming. The $50 million was completely gone within a decade, a financial evaporation that defies simple explanation. This pattern mirrors documented cases of sudden wealth loss, where rapid spending often outpaces financial management skills. Creditors filed multiple lawsuits as assets dwindled, creating a legal web that accelerated the financial collapse. The remaining assets had to be sold off systematically, a common final phase in such financial downfalls. This return to financial instability demonstrates how sudden wealth can create unsustainable lifestyles that collapse when resources deplete. The documented outcome stands in contrast to the unverified anecdotes about generosity and excess that often surround such stories. Financial experts note this pattern resembles lottery winner cases where windfalls disappear within years due to lack of planning. The complete loss of such substantial wealth in a single decade represents an extreme example of financial reversal. This case reveals clear patterns that apply to anyone receiving sudden wealth, not just lottery winners. The first critical lesson is establishing a financial buffer immediately after receiving funds. This involves setting aside a portion of the money before making any major decisions or announcements. The recommended method is to work with a trusted, fee-based financial advisor from the outset. This advisor should be engaged prior to any significant financial actions or lifestyle changes. Anonymous planning is another key component, helping to manage sudden attention and external pressures. Together, these steps create an essential safeguard against the rapid depletion of unexpected wealth. The mechanism is preventative, designed to counter the common psychological and social triggers of financial loss. Anonymity serves as a critical shield against the barrage of requests and scams that inevitably follow public windfalls. This protective layer is often the first casualty in the transition to a new, highly visible lifestyle. The core danger identified is identity spending, the use of purchases not for utility, but to project a newly acquired status. This behavior transforms assets from possessions into props for a performance of wealth. The mansions and car fleets are not acquired to meet genuine needs for space or transportation. Instead, they become symbols, purchased to signal a complete personal reinvention to the outside world. This new role, funded by sudden wealth, is inherently unsustainable when the spending outpaces the financial foundation. The performance requires constant upkeep, locking individuals into a cycle of expenditure to maintain the facade. Without the anchor of genuine need or long-term planning, these props become liabilities. The narrative shifts from one of acquisition to one of entrapment by the very symbols of success. This principle is observed in documented cases of sudden wealth, where existing personality traits become amplified. For individuals with a predisposition toward generosity, an influx of money can escalate this into pathological giving. This behavior often leads to financial depletion, as giving exceeds sustainable limits without strategic planning. Conversely, for those who seek external validation, wealth can fuel competitive spending to gain social status. This pattern is common in lottery winners and heirs, where public displays of consumption become a primary focus. Psychological studies note that money does not create new traits, but intensifies what is already present, for better or worse. In documented downfalls, this magnification leads to financial ruin when amplified traits override practical management. The mechanism is a feedback loop. Wealth provides more means to act on impulses, which in turn reinforces those behaviors. The core takeaway isn't a horror story about a curse, but a sobering study in scale. Without structure, guidance, and self-awareness, a sudden fortune can simply provide the fuel for a much faster and higher profile downfall. This pattern is observed in documented cases where rapid wealth acquisition precedes personal and financial collapse. The mechanism is psychological. Windfalls can remove natural constraints, accelerating pre-existing tendencies toward risk or consumption. The scale of the loss is often proportional to the size of the initial gain, making the fall more dramatic and public. Comparisons show that structured financial planning acts as a buffer, while its absence turns wealth into an accelerant. The most critical investment after a windfall isn't in real estate or stocks. It's in creating a system that protects you from your own impulses.
If the report helped, subscribe and open the next case.